Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Richard Haig. I am the National Lead for Tackling Child Sexual Exploitation for the Children's Society. Children's Society have a number of projects across England working with children and young people who have both been the victims of child sexual abuse and child sexual exploitation, and also lots of children and young people who are on the edges and who are at risk of becoming victims. So we wanted to take you through a project that we've been involved in recently called Seen and Heard. This was an initiative commissioned by the Department of Health in recognition of the fact that many of the children and young people who've been abused or who've been exploited felt that they wanted professionals, different professionals, to really have noticed and asked them and to have given them a chance to talk about what was going on for them. So I'll take you through the presentation that we've got for you today, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions at the end of this. One of the things that we were really pleased about was that the Department of Health were absolutely clear that they wanted us to create a training package that very much put forward the opinions and the views of young people themselves. And you'll hear lots of those views today. We spoke to over 100 young people who use our services, and it was them who provided, in their words, much of the content that you will see some other young people presenting today. We'll hear from our first one now.
Welcome to Seen and Heard. Many young people who have been abused or exploited have reported that they wanted to tell someone what was going on, but they didn't feel like they could, for a variety of reasons.
So as I said, key research has raised continuing concerns that organisations and agencies miss opportunities to stop child abuse and exploitation because they're not able to make sure that young people are seen and heard. Young people who do make disclosures often choose someone in their family or a friend, but it is estimated that many, and research says that perhaps a quarter, choose a professional to talk about what is going on for them. This is absolutely critical to what we're trying to do today. These are anybody who is coming into contact with children may just be that right person, right place at the right time, and if that child or young person wants to talk about what's going on, that could be the life-changing event for them. So we feel that this training is absolutely critical. The aims of the webinar are we hope that we can support you to understand what it's like to go to a service or appointment when you're a young person who might have something to tell, to be aware of what those young people have said they need so that they can feel they can talk, to make sure that those young people are seen and noticed by professionals, and to make sure that those young people are heard. We also, of course, it's important to know what to do if any of those young people do actually make a disclosure. So we wanted to start today just to make sure that we're all on the same page with a few basic facts and figures about the difficult subject of child abuse and child sexual exploitation. So we've got a little bit of a quiz for you to start with. So the first question is, child abuse in all its forms, including neglect, affects how many children in the UK every year according to the latest estimates? I'll give you just a few seconds to think about that. So the answer is 500,000 children have been abused in this country. And in terms of what we're going on to talk to you about today, what particular category of abuse, sexual abuse, 1 in 20 children in the UK have been sexually abused. Most of the children who are abused only suffer one type of abuse at a time. Do you think that that is true or false? It's false. You're probably not surprised to know that often children who are abused suffer more than one type of abuse, and often it's not just a one-off event. Sadly, it happens over a longer period of time. Girls are more likely to be sexually abused than boys. True or false? What do you think about that one? So it's actually true. as far as we know, to the best of our ability in terms of what's reported, it would appear that females report higher rates of sexual abuse than males. We think that boys don't report and don't disclose and don't talk about that abuse as much as girls. So that's the only caveat on that fact. It is easier for girls to disclose that they are being sexually abused than boys. True or false? And it's false. The difficulty for boys and girls disclosing or seeking support are different, but as you would imagine, incredibly difficult, irrespective of gender. Okay, so there are 4 statements on this screen, and only one of those is false. Which one do you think it is? I'll give you a minute or so to read through those. Which one of those do you think is the only false statement? The only false statement is that child sexual abuse is regularly committed by parents of the victims. In fact, it's relatively rare. Parents or guardians were the abusers in just 1.7% of sexual abuse cases. Of the data that's available, it's hard to draw many generalized conclusions about who the individual characteristics of perpetrators are. Next, what percentage of cases of child sexual abuse are not reported to the police? This is a question that speaks directly to the training that we're giving today, and in fact, shockingly for a lot of people, the correct answer is 70% of child sexual abuse cases are not reported to the police. We also have a line there just to say that almost 90% of survivors have not seen their abusers brought to justice. Final question from us here is that the difference between child abuse and child sexual exploitation is that children in child sexual exploitation cases consent to the sexual activity. True or false? It's actually false. The victims are children, however they present themselves. They cannot consent to their abuse, all the more given that grooming itself removes any real sense of self-determination from these children. There should be no scenarios in which victims are viewed as young women or as making choices. What we found historically with many of the young women who were victims of child sexual exploitation is that for a long time professionals from all agencies would often disregard those young people as making their own choices. They went to that address, they went to that flat, they chose to hang out with that man. But actually what we need to do, and what I think there's a growing recognition of, is that actually these young people are being manipulated, others have power over them which they're abusing, and they cannot be said to have consented to the abuse and exploitation that they've suffered. And the reason that we wanted to really start off with that quiz with you was just to underline the fact that child abuse and child sexual exploitation are not rare phenomenon. Many of you who are working in a health background or other backgrounds where you're coming into regular contact with children and young people will know that sadly abuse and exploitation is much more common than many people think. And of course the fact for us, and the driver behind much of this training, is that if you are coming into contact with children and young people, it is not a case of if one day you come into contact with children who are already being abused or who are going to be abused in the future, it's when. And once we all accept that across a different range of professions, I think it makes it really clear how important it is that everybody is as vigilant as possible to try and be the person that spots it as early as possible and is able to start to support young people into a better place where they are no longer being abused. So the Department of Health, when they commissioned this training, were really keen for us to work with filmmakers to produce a drama that would sit at the very heart of this training and really underline the messages and the plight that young people find themselves in, and the number of times they're in situations where they potentially have opportunities to talk about what's going on. So we're about to show you a film called Tyler's Story, which was especially made for this film, for this training package. It is fairly raw, and it tells a young person's story, and it doesn't pull any punches, but we really felt that it was important in terms of conveying the reality of these situations for young people. So we'll play that now. So that was a very stark and moving drama about Tyler, and you would have seen on the captions at the end, but I just want to underline, if that's raised difficult feelings for anybody, then there are helplines that anybody can talk to, either Childline or a line run for adults by NSPCC, and if you weren't able to get those numbers and you want those numbers, if you go on to the Seen and Heard website, you will see those numbers and be able to access that support. So in terms of coming back to the training, once we start to accept that there are stories, and lots of them like Tyler's, out there, when we understand how prevalent abuse is, when we think about the fact that we're in roles where we come into contact with children and young people, then I think it really underlines the challenge for all of us. We have to adopt that mindset where we think, okay, how is it that we can interact with young people? How can we receive them in our services in the way that is most likely to mean that they feel like they can talk about stuff that they have going on? And from my own experience, I know that most of the time for children and young people, there will be a million reasons why there is no way at any given moment that they would speak about what's going on for them. But I also know that for those children and young people, there are certain times, for whatever reasons, either things have just happened or they're certainly kind of worried more at a particular time, but there are just certain windows of opportunity open up where they perhaps will talk about things if the right opening presents itself. And given how rare those opportunities might be, it's a horrible thought to think that sometimes young people are ready to talk, and perhaps our services are not always acting in a way that maximises the chance that they'll feel okay to do so. So the rest of this training is really about trying to get direct feedback from young people about how it feels for them if they're carrying these kinds of histories and goings on. How do they feel when they go to things like health appointments, and what is it that they really want to see from the staff who receive them, and if they do choose to talk about things, how do they want staff to respond? So the first exercise that we thought we would do after Tyler's film is just to think about some of the signs that we sometimes see from children and young people who've been abused or exploited. And you've got on the slide in front of you a number of those signs, and we just ask you to think for a moment about, just to read through those and think about which of those, if any, did you see from Tyler. So certainly of those signs, the ones that we saw from Tyler were him reporting wetting or soiling the bed. He was concerned about his younger brother, didn't offer a plausible explanation as to why that was. Certainly shows challenging and disruptive behaviour, and we see him self-harming as he punches the wall. And of course, probably an obvious point, but worth me saying, when we see these kinds of signs from young people, of course it doesn't mean, that they are definitely being abused or exploited, and we're not for 1 minute saying that. What it does do is it sets the scene where really, this is where our ears should prick up, and, we should really start to watch very carefully, because these are just some of the signs which mean, that this might be something that's going on in the background. So we'll continue to just look at some of the signs that we often see, and again we have another list of signs that are recognised as being the kind of signs that children who are being abused can display. So I'll give you another moment to look through those and ask you again to think which of those applied to Tyler in the short film that we've just watched. So again, if we look at the signs of abuse that Tyler did display, we saw that anxiety, not wanting to be alone with certain people, including family members, frightened of a person and reluctant to be around, and we saw that again with Tyler during the film. I'll make the same point again. These signs are not conclusive of anything, but they're certainly the things that we need to be keeping an eye out for if we're trying to notice the type of things that might be going on for children and young people as early as we possibly can do. If we think about specifically child sexual exploitation for a moment, again for anybody who just needs that refresher about the definition of child sexual exploitation, it is a type of child abuse, and it's when a child is manipulated or forced into some kind of sexual activity in exchange for something that they think that they want or need. Some of the signs that indicate child sexual exploitation might be taking place are about to appear on the screen. As those signs appear, we just ask you for a moment to think about the role that you've got and the children and young people that you're coming into contact with, and just see whether any of these are the kinds of behaviours from young people that you've witnessed in your role. There are a number of signs there, and again the key point that we're trying to make here is we're going to introduce the concept of a radar shortly as part of the training, and these are really the kinds of behaviours that, if you are witnessing them, should really make you turn your radar on full. It's really worth trying to understand what might be going on for young people. Worth saying as well that of course lots of these behaviours, when they are presented by young people, are often quite a handful in terms of managing that kind of challenging behaviour. And again, it's about trying to just put ourselves in a position where we can think about what might be going on for those young people that's really leading to the kinds of behaviours that you are witnessing. So we'll get a young person's perspective on that now.
I always get worried about being in waiting areas with other young people.
I felt awkward about the number of questions and what I was going to be asked.
I got a male worker and hadn't been told about that. I didn't want a male worker. I felt sick.
I was really embarrassed about what if I had to show my private parts.
I get confused about what information is going to be shared and with who. I just shut down if I go somewhere. I don't trust adults, me.
And one of the things when I was working with young people and they were really giving us that information is, when you think about young people like Tyler and the things that he has going on for him and having to carry that around, you really get that level of wariness from young people about going anywhere for things like health appointments or anywhere new or anywhere where they may have to talk to different adults. And research also tells us some of the reasons why children and young people find it so difficult to disclose the abuse or exploitation that they might be going through, why they find it so hard to talk about their something to tell.
didn't feel like I had anyone to turn to.
My family had a lot of different problems. Drugs, alcohol, stress, and my dad was being violent. How'd you start talking about that?
I just didn't realise at the time that the abuse was wrong.
It was just impossible to find the right words that would explain what was going on.
I was agreeing to have sex because I loved him. I didn't realise that I was being manipulated, and it still counted as abuse.
I'm gay, and I'd got into a scene where having sex with people a lot older than me was the done thing. It seemed normal.
So as we really start to think about how we can maximise the chances that young people feel like they can talk to us, let's hear from them directly. What is it that they feel like they need which will leave them in a place where they feel most like talking?
When we go somewhere for an appointment or whatever, there are different things that affect whether we end up feeling like we might be able to talk. But you have to remember, like the cartoons before, we're all different, but what works for one doesn't always work for everyone.
When we really looked at all the different things that young people were telling us, there was really four key messages that came through from them that were really important. And those four were, I think it's Clippers or...
No.
No, okay. So the four things that overwhelmingly young people were telling us about were first impressions. So when they first arrive at that clinic or at a hospital or at any setting, the way that they're greeted, the way, you know, receptionists have a key role. All of us, as we see those young people who first come to perhaps a new place for them, they're wary. How they're first received plays a massive part of how they go on to feel. Yeah, they want to be respected. Young people want to feel like they're being treated seriously and properly. Relationships was a theme that came up time and time again. If young people are able to see the same person rather than a different person every time, then they start to be able to build trust. They start to not have to retell their story over and over again, which they said was a constant source of frustration. And the final one, choices. Young people always were telling us about, okay, as much as possible, they want to be given choices. They want to have some kind of control over the situation, about who they see and when they see them, and about what they talk about. These are all really important things for young people.
If you go somewhere, the first person you talk to really affects how you feel and act. Whether you even stay, it's got to feel like a safe place.
Staff should make sure they smile, act friendly, and be polite.
Don't ask us what we're here for at reception. We just lie because we don't want anyone hearing stuff and sharing it with our family.
Well, the building matters and stuff, but what matters more is having the right staff. I want to talk in a room where I'm not going to be interrupted.
Don't be critical of the life choices that I've made.
I need to know that my sexuality is not going to become common knowledge until I'm ready.
We're not going to talk if we think we're just going to be judged and looked down on. I always ask for the same doctor. If you see the same person over time, then you get to build a bond with them.
You hate it when you have to repeat your situation to every new person you see. Why do they make notes if the next person's just going to ask you the same stuff all over again? Seriously?
It's just easier to talk if you feel like the person knows you a bit.
So this slide, having heard the young people's perspective, comes from the Children's Commissioner, and their research, they talked to an awful lot of young people and also looked at cases. And they were clear that if a trusted professional responds sensitively and shows concern for the child, they may then begin to think about underlying problems. Young people often described how conversations prompted recognition and relationships of trust promoted telling and help. So, you know, this is not mission impossible. If young people get the chance to see staff who are responding in the right way, if there's a little bit of consistency around that, then young people will start to talk about what's going on.
If I choose to see someone, that's good. But if I'm made to see someone, I feel more negative.
It's important to get a choice of who you talk to, a man or a woman. When we have to go in a room and talk to someone, we like having a choice, whether to be alone or whether to have someone with us.
A place is more likely to get it right if they give as much choice as possible over stuff.
So again, young people with some really clear views there about what's important to them. If they've got something to tell, what is it that they is likely to increase their chances about feeling okay about talking about that stuff? Well, actually, there's research as well, and we have a slide that shows that 4 of the most common reasons that prompt young people to actually take that step and make a disclosure are, firstly, to stop the abuse. Secondly, to protect others, and that clearly was the story that was happening with Tyler. Thirdly, to seek justice, and fourth, to receive emotional support. We've got a slide here again that shows that research has suggested that sexual abuse is unlikely to be disclosed. However, a study done by the NSPCC showed that 86% of the young people they spoke to did actually disclose during childhood, and 66% actually attempted to disclose whilst that abuse was happening. However, like many high-profile cases, and we've seen a whole load of media coverage, in lots of different ways over the last few years about very high-profile cases of child sexual abuse and exploitation. And like many of those cases, sadly, there were far too many situations where when young people were talking about what was happening, then the professionals involved were not hearing or acting upon what young people had actually told them. Young people reported as well as part of that research that they generally made more than one disclosure. And it's really quite alarming because 20% of those young people who were part of that study continued to be abused at least 1 year or more after making those disclosures. And I mean, that really is something for us all to think about, that even after making the massive step to actually talk about the things that were going on for them, that harm continued. And this training process is just one small part of what I hope is a concerted effort to shift so that doesn't happen anymore. The facts don't really get any better for that group. The abuse continued for an average of almost 6 years after their first disclosure, and over 30% who continued to be abused after making the disclosures had disclosed to somebody in a statutory position, such as a GP, a social worker, a doctor, or a teacher. So we've spent some time thinking about young people and disclosures. How do we make sure then that we actually notice them and see them?
If you talk to us like we're people, we know you've seen us. We'll feel more like talking. We don't only want to deal with the suit or a uniform. We want to see the human underneath it.
It's good to ask us about other things, not just the things that the appointment was made for. But don't pressure us, and don't act like you just want to finish your shift and go home. We can tell when you're not really interested.
Lots of the time, young people just won't want to talk. Nothing you can do will change that on the day, because talking about some things can feel impossible. But there still might be signs. You have to look out for them.
And I think this next slide is perhaps one of the key slides in all of the training this afternoon, and that was that an important finding was that some young people did not feel that they could disclose their abuse at the time, but they would have liked someone to notice and ask them. And this really is about trying to get the message across to everybody coming into contact with children and young people about the need to be proactive. Many of you will have had child protection training, and sometimes that training will have involved the need not to ask leading questions of young people, and that training is absolutely right. I'm not talking about asking leading questions of young people here, but what we are talking about is where you see the kinds of signs or behaviours that we were looking at a few minutes ago, just about noticing and recognising those signs of young people and asking them how they are and perhaps why they are getting involved in that behaviour, and just giving them a space to actually potentially talk about what's going on. Will they take it? Maybe they will, maybe they won't, but certainly the fact that somebody noticed was something young people told us was really important in terms of building trust, and the fact that somebody showed they were interested, again, massive in terms of building that kind of critical trust with young people. Again, same point really. A number of young people had contacted professionals and they believed that the professionals should have asked more questions to uncover the nature of their depression and self-harming behaviours, which stemmed directly from the abuse they were experiencing. So there's this idea about being, and I like this phrase, I think it sums it up well, professionally curious about when we see these signs, about making the space so that young people can potentially talk about the stuff that's going on. And I'm really aware, as I say this, that it's very, very easy for somebody like me to talk about this in a training exercise. Incredibly difficult to keep your radars on and make that space on a busy Thursday afternoon where you're already behind schedule and you've got 101 things to do. But that's, this really, cuts to the heart of what we're talking about. The stakes are, I think, so high that if we do have that young person in front of us, if it is a day where they're thinking they might talk about what's going on, if it's Tyler, then really we have to strive to still be in a position where we will make those observations and create those spaces for young people. Let's hear from them about what they say about this.
If you've got your radars on and you think you might be seeing some signs, ask us about it. Maybe we'll talk about it, maybe we won't, but we'll notice that you noticed. If we don't talk this time, next time we might. Things change. If we do want to speak out, will you hear us?
This slide tells us that many young people did disclose the abuse before they turned 18, but often disclosures of sexual abuse come a long time after that abuse has begun. It doesn't say so here, but there is other information and research which suggests that on average it's around 6 or 7 years after the abuse starts that disclosures often start to happen. For younger people who experience sexual abuse, the younger they were when the abuse started, often the longer the delay in the actual disclosure of that abuse. And young people have told us that there are different reasons why they make the choice to actually disclose at certain times, and those reasons were as follows. There's a number of factors there, just having the opportunity to talk with someone who you trust enough to tell, and again, I can't urge you enough that if you are able to arrange your services in a way which means young people come across the same young people and are able to build a bit more of a relationship and a bit more of trust, that's a critical thing in terms of increasing the chances of young people talking about what's going on. Developmental changes and learning. Often when sexual abuse starts for children, they're unable to put it in a context when it begins. That means that they understand that it's wrong. As they grow older, that can change, and they understand that what's happening is wrong. The abuse can get worse. The next box, again, this underlines the point that I'm really keen to make to you, which is that somebody notices the signs and asks them directly. They can reach a point where they feel they can't cope with the abuse anymore, or again, the Tyler situation, they want to protect others from similar abuse.
I just want people to be calm. Don't pressure us about stuff. Don't be rushing us. At times I felt like that they wanted to talk at me rather than listen to me. Check that we understand confidentiality and don't make us feel like we're on a production line.
This point really underlines the one that I made earlier about here we're calling it proactive inquiry. I called it being professionally curious. Same thing really. The onus is on us as professionals to notice and to ask our young people how they are. Where professionals ask children questions to follow up on concerns and suspicions, it not only provides an opportunity for children to tell, but also sends a message that they're willing and able to listen to the disclosure. So young people start to think about the fact that they've got an option in terms of talking about what's actually going on.
Sometimes staff belittle the problems you tell them about, so you're hardly going to tell them about the bigger stuff you might not have talked to anyone about. Don't freak out when we tell you stuff, or you'll freak us out. Just reassure us. If we start to tell you about stuff, tell us that it's okay.
Don't be afraid to ask us questions about our sexuality. Just ask us how we describe ourselves, then use those words back to us.
So one of the really interesting things about putting this training package together was we really tried to do our homework. We looked at lots of the eminent research into abuse and exploitation. I said before, we talked to over 100 individual young people who use our services as well, and what was really interesting was that young people really told us things that was underlined by the research. And again, this slide tells us how the two things that really themes that come through about making it okay to disclose were a process of being able to either build trust as well as others asking questions about what's going on, and both of that trust process and that open question which provides a space to talk happening in a safe place, and they were instrumental in leading to disclosures.
I'd never had a boyfriend before, and some people don't get what it's like to have autism or something like that. I was in all the special classes when I'm not stupid, and I'm not meaning to be rude, but most of the other kids were either in trouble all the time or really thick because of their disability. I was teased by other kids, and no boy showed any interest in me. I know I'm different because of my autism, but it doesn't mean I don't want things that other people have.
We were keen as part of the training just to really highlight there are certain groups of children and young people who are marginalised in terms of being able to both talk about what's going on and receive support for that, and children with either learning or physical disabilities certainly fall into that category. And this slide really just makes the point that they're less likely to be identified as victims, and that often signs of abuse can be misattributed to the disability. Key point being that children with a disability are especially vulnerable if they have an impairment with their communication skills, meaning they're less able to report abuse directly.
We want you to look like you're listening and to explain carefully what's going to happen next. If you are going to break confidentiality and pass on stuff, you should at least tell us about it, and don't promise stuff if you can't stick to it.
So one of the things that also comes through from research is that many young people who do choose to talk about what's going on find the experience unsatisfactory. What are the reasons? Well, they feel that the staff that they trusted and told didn't do enough, or that they were belittled and patronised and treated beneath their age and understanding, or again, one of the repeated themes that comes out is that professionals communicated about them in a way that the young people didn't like, and also this thing about young people feeling that they lose control and they make this massive step about talking about what's going on, and then they're not told about what's going to happen next. They're not kept in the picture, and they feel an increased level of vulnerability, and they feel exposed.
All of the things we just mentioned are really important to us when we are thinking about whether or not to talk about something.
People who have been abused and who have told someone about it say that there are 3 things that need to happen to make telling someone feel positive. The young person felt believed. Some action was taken to protect the young person. The young person received some kind of emotional support to help them through the process.
We tried to give you a real blend there, both of what the research tells us, what young people need in order to feel seen and heard, and also the messages from young people directly about what it is that needs to happen to make them feel like they've got the space to potentially make a disclosure. Of course, if young people do make a disclosure, it's absolutely imperative that you follow the right procedures and take the right actions. So we wanted to put a slide in really that just underlined some of those essential requirements. Your organisations will all, I'm sure, have safeguarding procedures. You've probably had training in those procedures, and it's imperative that you follow those. We'd want to sort of labour the point as well that if you're unsure, if you're told a bit of information from a young person and you're unsure about whether or not to pass that information on, then you should always pass it on to the safeguarding professional. If you're going to get that decision wrong, I always say get it wrong by passing it on when actually it turns out that there were no concerns and no further action is needed. That's a much better way of getting it wrong than actually being told something and choosing not to pass it on and getting it wrong, which of course leaves a child exposed and in a situation where they continue to be abused. We'd urge you to discuss the issues with colleagues in confidential settings in terms of helping you to make any decisions if you feel like you are wrestling with them. If you're not clear what safeguarding procedures you should be following, then we'd direct you towards somebody in your line management chain. If ever something happens with a young person and you need guidance, if you can't speak to your line manager, then contact social services and or the police directly. One of the things that young people tell us over and over again is that sometimes when they've made the disclosure, they've felt left to one side as procedures start. And again, it's imperative that we try to stay child-centred and continue supporting the young person throughout the process. Yeah, we thought this was a great quote from a nurse operating in a GP's practice, and she was saying that they've got a very low threshold for talking about any niggling concerns with colleagues, either immediately or in the weekly clinical meetings. So we wanted to make the point that, of course, abuse and exploitation happens not just to children, also to adults as well, particularly vulnerable adults who find themselves in vulnerable situations who can also be victims. So all of the messages that we tried to convey to you here about the importance of seeing and hearing young people also applies to adults in those vulnerable situations.
If we don't tell you anything and you miss the signs, it means you haven't seen us. If we tell you and you don't do anything about it, then it means you haven't heard us. And if bad stuff is happening to us, it'll just keep on carrying on.
So we want to try our best across all services to keep young people safe. We ask you to make sure you keep your seen and heard radar on. And by radar, we really tried to boil down our key messages into an easy to remember format. They are for respect, making sure that we treat young people in the way that they want to be treated. A for approach, thinking carefully about showing them warmth from the start, trying to build a relationship with them. D for discover, be proactive, be professionally curious, stay alert. A for ask, again that proactivity. It's not for the onus to be on young people to make a disclosure completely cold. We can ask how they are, what's happening, why they're acting the way that they are, and try to create a space for them to be able to talk about what's going on. And then finally, as we've just covered, if they do talk about what's going on and there's a disclosure, it's absolutely vital that we respond in the correct fashion and follow procedures.
Seen and Heard have set a target of getting a message to over 750,000 professionals, and we need your help. We need you to encourage as many people as you can to visit the website and do the e-learning, or we've got a special presentation that's really easy to use, which you can use with any group of people in your workplace.
Right now, there's probably someone in your room who's done just that and arranged for you to be a part of this workshop. We'd like to say a massive thank you to that person for being a seen and heard champion and arranging this, and to you for being a part of this. The closer we get to all young people being seen and heard, the sooner we can help all young people to be safe. Please visit our website for more details, information and resources, and please, please try to spread the word about seen and heard.
You've had direct messages there from young people. They've said really what I need to, just to say a massive thank you to you. We tried to cover a lot of content there. I'm frightened Ethel's going to tell me off. I wanted to get that done in an hour and we've overrun by 5 minutes slightly, so I do apologise for that.